after the Alaska summit, Moscow clearly expected something more from Donald Trump. Fewer sanctions, more dialogue, maybe even a softer American line on Russia. Lavrov admits that Trump says Ukraine is Biden's war and that the dialogue with Moscow has resumed. He even praises the many right words being said about future Russia-US projects in technology, energy and other areas. But then comes the complaint. In reality, nothing is happening. Moscow was waiting for a reset, but got almost the same line, only with a different packaging. And Voicer also reports that Lavrov told Russia Today India there had been regular dialogue between Moscow and Washington, but no tangible progress in relations.
President Trump has repeatedly said that Ukraine is Biden's war, not his war. And nevertheless, yes, we appreciate that President Trump started a dialogue with us, with President Putin. We have also communicated at other levels, at the level of the Secretary of State and your humble servant. The Russian president's aide meets with President Trump's special representative and says many correct words. That Russia and the United States have enormous prospects for mutually beneficial modern technological, energy, and other projects. But in practice, nothing is happening. In practice, apart from this regular dialogue, which is normal in communication between people and states, everything else is the same line, the very same line that Biden started. All the sanctions against Russia adopted under Biden remain in force. Moreover, the Trump administration is now taking its own initiatives for the economic punishment of Russia.
So this is what Putin means by peace. Just a few days ago, he was saying that the war against Ukraine was supposedly coming to an end. And now the Kremlin is testing an intercontinental ballistic missile capable of carrying a nuclear warhead. Russia says the launch of Sarmat was successful. This is the missile designed to replace the Soviet Voyevoda, the one known in the West as Satan. The new Sarmat is already being called Satan too. Let me remind you, since the invasion of Ukraine, the Kremlin has repeatedly tried to keep everyone on edge, threatening the West with a nuclear escalation to discourage support for Kyiv. But now the reality has changed. The last nuclear arms control treaty between Russia and the United States has expired. The world's two largest nuclear arsenals are no longer restrained by the old agreements. And at this point, Putin seems to be getting completely carried away. After the humiliation of the May 9 parade, he could hardly have come up with a better distraction.
President Trump has repeatedly said that Ukraine is Biden's war, not his war. And nevertheless, yes, we appreciate that President Trump started a dialogue with us, with President Putin. We have also communicated at other levels, at the level of the Secretary of State and your humble servant. The Russian president's aide meets with President Trump's special representative and says many correct words. That Russia and the United States have enormous prospects for mutually beneficial modern technological, energy, and other projects. But in practice, nothing is happening. In practice, apart from this regular dialogue, which is normal in communication between people and states, everything else is the same line, the very same line that Biden started. All the sanctions against Russia adopted under Biden remain in force. Moreover, the Trump administration is now taking its own initiatives for the economic punishment of Russia.
Russia attacked Ukraine again overnight into May 13 with the drones. According to Ukraine's Air Force, Russia launched 139 drones from Tuesday evening, with 111 down or neutralized. But there were also hits. Drones targeted Dnipropetrovsk, Kharkiv, Odessa and Poltava regions, striking residential, railway, port and energy infrastructure. Zelensky's main warning is that Russia is increasingly shifting attacks into daylight hours to disrupt civilian life even more.
There are currently more than 100 Russian drones in our skies, and there may be additional waves of drone attacks during the day. Russia continues its strikes and does so brazenly, deliberately targeting our railway infrastructure and civilian facilities in cities. During this night alone, our warriors have already shot down or suppressed 111 drones. It is important to steadfastly repel every attack. It is important to support Ukraine and not remain silent about Russia's war. Every time the topic of the war disappears from the top of the news, it encourages Russia to become even more brutal. Ukraine needs defense capabilities every day, and only strong, joint action can ensure this.
The Kremlin is now explaining what Putin meant when he said the war against Ukraine was coming to an end. Peskov says there is some baggage of developments in the peace process and that this supposedly allows Moscow to speak about the end approaching. But then he immediately admits there are still no specifics. So the Kremlin is again selling the feeling of peace, not peace itself. Putin says the war is nearing an end. Peskov says there is no concrete detail. And at the same time, Russia continues the war, continues setting conditions, and continues presenting Moscow as the place where Ukraine should come to talk.
The baggage of developments in terms of the peace process allows us to say that the completion is indeed approaching. But it is not possible to talk about any specifics in this context at the moment.
Ahead of the Bucharest 9 summit, Polish President Karol Nawrocki met Romanian President Nicos Ordan. The war in Ukraine was one of the central topics, along with Putin's latest claims about peace and the question of how Europe should prepare if Russia does not stop. Their message was cautious but clear. Putin's words about a possible end to the war should not be trusted blindly. Polish President Karol Nawrocki said Kremlin statements must be treated with skepticism. Yes, talks are taking place, and yes, everyone wants a just and lasting peace for Ukraine, but Ukraine is the victim here, while Russia continues the war despite all its talk of a ceasefire. Romanian president said that past few days are proof that Russia keeps fighting even when it claims it wants a ceasefire. According to him, countries in the region should not base their security on Moscow's promises, but on the risk of further Russian aggression, and coordinate through NATO, the EU, and the Bucharest 9.
Of course, we all want a durable and fair peace in Ukraine, and I'm happy there are negotiations in this direction. But regarding President Putin's words, I'm skeptical. According to our security office reports, we know how the situation in Ukraine looks, and the reports show that Russia lost more ground than it occupied. And also, we have statistics that show economic setbacks in Russia. So we see that peace is also in Russia's interest. But like any other European leader, I also wish a fair peace, especially that we know who's the victim here. But regarding Putin's words, we need to regard them with skepticism.
Putin and Zelensky are losing faith in Trump's peace track. Donald Trump keeps saying that peace in Ukraine is getting closer. But behind closed doors, both Moscow and Kyiv appear to be reaching a very different conclusion, that US-led peace process is losing meaning. According to the Financial Times, Russia and Ukraine see little chance of reviving serious negotiations. Putin has shifted his focus back to the battlefield, above all to the Donbass. And if Russia manages to take more territory there, the Kremlin may only raise the price of any ceasefire. Kyiv's calculation is also changing. Ukraine believes it is less vulnerable to pressure for a quick and unfavorable deal because Russia's advance has slowed and Ukrainian drone strikes are hitting deeper into Russian rear areas.
There has been zero progress secured by the American side from Russia. The truth is that Russia is still attempting to achieve victory on the battlefield while sticking to its maximalist demands.
The US Senate is questioning the Pentagon chief over the budget, allies, Ukraine and China. $1.5 trillion for the US Department of Defense and more questions for a Trump administration. Does Washington have a clear strategy at a moment when several crises are coming together at once? In the US Senate, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth faced tough questions about the record military budget, the war with Iran, relations with China, support for allies, and the role of Ukraine. The focus on Europe was especially sharp. Why does the administration plan to withdraw 5,000 American troops from Germany right now when Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran are moving closer together? Democratic Senator Chris Coons accused the administration of losing focus. In his view, at a moment like this, the United States should not push its allies away or lecture them, but rely more deeply on those who share America's real security threats.
I'm just going to simply say, in terms of our reliance on our partnerships, I'll agree with the chairman that at a moment when Russia and China, North Korea and Iran are coming closer together and delivering a bedeviling lethality in this ongoing war in Iran, for which we don't have a clear strategy or clear answers, our better strategy would be to partner more closely with Ukraine, dig in deeper with our real values-based allies, our treaty allies in the Western Pacific and in Europe, and together find a path out of this, rather than berating them and bullying them for not coming along in a war they were not consulted about or briefed on before it began. I look forward to a second round.
For another more time, the Kremlin is saying Russia's war against Ukraine could end at any moment, but only if Kyiv accepts the decision Moscow wants from it. Dmitry Peskov claimed that so-called special military operation could stop immediately if Ukraine's leadership takes responsibility and makes what he called the necessary decision. In other words, Moscow is again trying to present peace not as a mutual process, but as Ukraine's surrender to Russian condition. This is the same Kremlin logic. Russia invades, occupies and attacks Ukrainian cities and then says the war will end as soon as Ukraine makes the right choice.
The special military operation can stop at any moment, as soon as the Kiev regime and Zelensky take responsibility and make the necessary decision. What decisions need to be made is well known in Kiev.
How much does one day of war cost Kyiv? Ukrainian Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiga gave the figure, around $450 million a day. But he immediately made clear that this is not only a financial price. Ukraine is also paying every day with the blood of its soldiers. According to Sybiga, 2026 could be decisive for reaching peace. But without the United States, he says, a real process to end the war is impossible. Kyiv needs not just American involvement, but Washington's influence and pressure on Russia. And that is why talk of a quick peace sounds so dangerous. For Ukraine, every day of war means hundreds of millions of dollars, destroyed cities and human lives. For Russia, as Sybiga has said before, one day of the war against Ukraine costs almost $1 billion.
Pivotal moment, and this year could become pivotal to achieve peace. Once again, for us, for Ukraine, one day of the war costs approximately $450 million per day. So it's but the most challenging for us because we pay the highest price. We want to end this war once again, and the only way to strengthen, to increase pressure on Russia by different instruments. It is unrealistic to achieve through process of finalization of our peace efforts without American side. It is not possible. We need their engagement, but also in parallel we need their influence and their pressure on Russia.
That's all for now. Thank you for watching.